So, aloha and ekomo mai. Welcome here in Stewart's wonderful garden.
Thank you.
I'm very honored and very happy that I can be here today with you, Stewart Blackburn, my lovely teacher, mentor, and he's calling himself Shaman of Pleasure, which is a very accurate and very nice name, I think, for what you're doing.
Thank you.
So we will come to that a little bit later, what that means. But I want to start with a quote from your book that you gave me as a gift a couple of days ago, The Skills of Pleasure. And I started reading it, and the very first text you have printed in there says, is a quote from Samuel Butler, and it says, "All animals except man know that the principal business of life is to enjoy it." I think that's a very insightful quote, and I want to ask you, why is that? Why have humans forgotten that truth, that life is about enjoying it?
It's got a profound answer, so let me just jump into that then.
Sure.
We as human beings are learning basically how to be human beings. We're learning how to be spirit, how to be powerful manifestors and creators. And the system that we've got to tell us how we're doing is pleasure. So by not always going for pleasure, but by having to discover that pleasure is how we measure our progress, we then have a way of saying, okay, this is in alignment with my spirit, this is out of alignment. And so by seeking the pleasure, and every choice we make is based on a desire to feel better than we currently do. And so that's pleasure. And so we have this ability, or this metric of our way of doing things, or our understanding of how we're doing, is pleasure, and it gives us a way of understanding our lives that without pleasure we wouldn't have.
Right, so what you want to say is, by forgetting the main purpose, like this quote says,
Right.
we also make sure that we recognize pleasure when it comes our way. Or,
Right. And we go through all kinds of other ways of living a life, so we better understand what works and what doesn't work. And most people don't really understand what pleasure is, and that's fine, but it's all part of the education that we all go through to learn who we are by the use of pleasure.
Right, and that actually leads me to another question. How do you define pleasure, and why is it a good idea to pay much more attention to it than we do, and than most people do?
Right, okay. So I define pleasure as a catch-all term, a word that refers to all those things that feel good.
Okay.
So we have obviously bodily pleasures, but we also have mental pleasures like solving puzzles. We have our emotional pleasures, like sharing a cup of tea with friends. And we have spiritual pleasures. So there are all kinds of ways that we feel good, and the only term I know of that encompasses all these is pleasure.
Right.
And so we use this pleasure, and when we get used to it and understand it, then it becomes our way of seeing where to go, how to make decisions, and
based on what feels good.
That's right.
Right.
I mean, basically, all of your decisions are based on wanting to feel good or feel better than you are currently. Most of the time, we then rationalize those decisions and say, oh, but this decision makes sense because of this, this, and this.
Right.
But the decision was actually made on what's going to make us feel good.
Right, absolutely. But then why are we not used more to think in terms of pleasure? Because as you write also in the first chapters of your book, many people are not used to pay attention to pleasure and to what feels good at all. So how did that come about? And because I always think by understanding the reason for something, we can also deal with it better.
Well, I can give you reasons.
Right.
I can give you history.
Okay, yeah.
But does that really make any sense? Particularly when we're talking about a spiritual path. I mean, pleasure is a spiritual path.
Right.
And one of the most interesting things about it as a spiritual path is that when we have something that we like, we enjoy it, and then it serves us. It no longer pleases us. We become dissatisfied with it. Inevitably. Pleasure is not a thing. Pleasure is a response to an experience. And consequently, pleasures go up and down. And all pleasures come to an end. Every last one of them. So, what we do is when it comes to an end, we then seek a bigger pleasure, a better pleasure, a fuller pleasure. Unless we just say, oh, I give up. But anybody that has any energy and any sense of vitality will look for a better pleasure. Well, fine. So you find another pleasure that's even better, and you do that until you become dissatisfied with it, till it is no longer such a great pleasure, until something else happens, at which point you find an even better pleasure. Well, if you keep doing this over and over again, then you find yourself coming to the great spiritual pleasures, which is how all the great spiritual masters got there.
By seeking pleasure.
By seeking pleasure. They didn't call it that, but that's what they were doing. And so the great spiritual pleasures, bliss, ecstasy, harmony and joy. These are all great spiritual pleasures. And you only get there when you let go of the other things that are just not as good.
Right. So one could say it's a good idea to really be aware of what feels good and pay attention to pleasure, because it leads us into our potential and into growth and an evolution of our of what we are.
Right. And we don't even have to set that out as a goal to evolve. It's going to happen naturally unless you resist it.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's going to happen naturally, yeah. And we just have to let us being carried by it, right?
And relax.
And relax, yes, right. So, when and how did you, and why, did you decide to teach the skills of pleasure and become a shaman of pleasure? Can you give us a little bit of insight about your personal...
I remember as a teenager being aware that it was pleasure that was driving everybody, and not all the high-minded stuff that I was being taught in school. Everybody, well, let me put it another way. I did recognize that I wasn't having a whole lot of fun because I was trying to be good in high school. And it was the people who were not being good who had a lot more fun.
Okay.
And I said, what the heck? This is crazy. I want to have more fun. So I turned my life around at that point. It was no longer quite so good. But it really shocked me that pleasure is what's driving people, but they don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
They don't understand how pleasure works and what to do with it. And that is why the 7 skills of pleasure started evolving in my mind. And I was saying, okay, this is how it works. But most people don't see it, don't understand it. And I couldn't understand why they didn't. So I wrote a book, and they still don't understand. But at least they have a book.
Yes, at least they have something they can try to understand it with.
Right.
Right. So, of course, you cannot give a rundown of the whole book, but what are the skills of pleasure?
Well, we start with desire and understand that all desires are about pleasure, as I said earlier.
Right.
That it's about desire to feel better than we currently do. Well, in order to feel better than we currently do, we have to have some sense of how we're feeling. So the first skill is to be aware. How are you feeling?
Right.
And the corollary to that is, how do you feel about how you're feeling?
Oh, okay.
Because you may be feeling okay, but do you like feeling just okay? Do you have any desire to feel better than okay? So first one is to be mindful of how you're feeling. The second one is to give yourself permission to feel better than you've ever felt before. Permission. We have to constantly give ourselves permission, because we live in a culture that, for which or for whom, pleasure is suspect. And so in order to counter that, we have to acknowledge that pleasure is okay, and it's okay for us to enjoy ourselves, to feel good. And there isn't something else that's more important than feeling good.
Right.
Everything else is built around the desire to feel better. I mean, if you think that money is the most important thing, but nobody admits that, but it's there, obviously. But having money is about having the ability to get pleasure.
Sure.
So, and if you think about religious things, religious goals, that's all about feeling the ecstasy of being one with God, or however you want to put it.
Right.
Even a masochist will get pleasure out of hurting themselves or letting other people hurt them. So it really is there in everything we do, but if we're not willing to face it honestly, then we're in trouble. And so that's why I say we need to give ourselves permission
Right.
to
That's
feel
very
better
important.
than we ever have before.
Right.
The third one is to be an adventurer. That is to say, to be willing to go where we've never gone before, to explore, to not know what the end result is going to be. That requires a bit of courage,
Right.
and without being an adventurer in that sense, life becomes very dull. So we have to push past our boundaries and say, okay, that looks cool, whatever it is, but I'm going to have to get past my comfort zone. And in that sense, you go discover even greater pleasures than you've known before.
So you have to get into the unknown and get comfortable with the unknown, kind of, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And understand that that we're always growing, and that we have to grow. We have to have a sense that, okay, this is nice, but I need to find something different here, and maybe find a new pleasure here. It's the kind of growth, creative growth, that is imperative. It's an existential imperative to expand who we are. If we don't expand, we die.
And that's a very important point. Let me jump in here for a second, because to be aware that, okay, this is nice, but I don't feel entirely satisfied by it anymore. I want something else. I want to seek greater pleasures. Means for me that actually all of growth and all of evolution we can do and growing doesn't have to be connected to suffering, because it's always for a greater good, for a greater pleasure, right?
Right.
And that's very important. That's also what I'm writing. I'm about to publish my first book, which is exactly about that topic. Why actually it's not entirely true when you say you have to leave your comfort zone, which many people think has to be uncomfortable, because you're doing it for a greater pleasure you are seeking. I think that's very important also for the subconscious to understand that if you are feeling entirely well, there is no need to change anything about that, kind of, right? But if you're not, then you can go into the unknown to get greater pleasures.
Yes, I agree. But I think that it's important to remember that we have this imperative to grow.
Right, yeah.
And it is basically as important as eating and drinking.
It's in us, innate.
It is innate in us.
Yes.
That we have to explore more.
Right.
And the basis of that is the desire for even more pleasure.
Right, yeah.
So, and we can call, I mean, you can call it anything you want. But it all comes down to something that makes us feel good.
Right.
And that exploration, that excitement of life is about discovering things.
Right, yeah.
So that's skill number 3. Skill number 4 is a very important one. It's about looking for pleasure. That is to say, if I look around this garden, I can see lots of things that I would like to see different and clean up and do and change and all that. But the 4th skill of pleasure is to look around and just appreciate, look for things to enjoy. And in our lives, we normally think that we have lots of things that we have to do, all sorts of tasks. But if we don't make a point of stopping to enjoy these things,
right,
we are wasting our lives.
Right.
And there's no point in that. So it is a conscious effort to stop and enjoy things. That leads us to skill number 5, which might be the most important one. And that's the skill of savoring. Savoring is the mindfulness of pleasure. It's taking the time to let that pleasure sink in. This is something that allows you to, one, feed your soul, and basically change who you are. By savoring, we are feeding that part of us that needs to grow. And it takes time. That's the thing about it. And to savor is to just take a bite of something and hold that focus on how delightful that bite is, or that rose is, or that picture is, or whatever it is. But we allow ourselves to be changed by this pleasure and allow it to sink into us. Because we're recreating ourselves in every moment. And if we recreate ourselves with the things that we're worried about, the things that scare us, the things that we regret, okay, fine. I mean, that's how we're creating our lives. But if we allow ourselves to pay attention to the things that really excite us and that we enjoy, that's how we're creating our life. And that's how we are able to make other moments, the next subsequent moments, as pleasurable, if not more pleasurable than the ones we've already had. So it really has a profound effect on our lives and where we go to from here when we savor.
Right. So recreation of ourselves by mindful enjoying things, right?
Oh, nicely put.
Thank you.
Skill number 6 is another very important one. I mentioned that all pleasures come to an end, every last one of them. So what do you do when a pleasure comes to an end? What happens then? A lot of people will mourn the loss of a pleasure. You have a relationship, and for one reason or another, it comes to an end. Are you going to spend your time mourning the loss of that relationship? It could be a pet, it could be a lover, it could be a house, whatever it is. If you're spending your time mourning its loss, again, you're wasting your life. Now, it's understandable that when something like that happens and you didn't want it to happen, but it did anyway, then fine, you have an obligation to yourself to find a way to get past that. I find that the easiest way that I've found, at least for myself, is to first be grateful for the things that I enjoyed in the past. So if I've lost a person, then I will be grateful for all the wonderful times that I've had with that person and all the love we shared. And I will do that up to a point. And then when I can, I will say, but now I know things have changed. That's the key piece. That's when things flip. I know that things have changed. And if you're not comfortable with change, then you're going to have a hard time in life. So the more comfortable you can get with change, which is constant, the more pleasure you'll get out of life. And it's from that spot, then you can say, okay, now I will turn my attention to the pleasure around the corner, the next pleasure coming. Mm-hmm. And so that is a serious skill to do. Mm-hmm. But once you get the hang of it, it makes life so much easier. And the 7th skill is about paying attention to what are your pleasures. What are the most important pleasures in your life? Mm-hmm. You've got tons of things that you enjoy, but are you paying attention to the ones that bring you the most joy? Most people will be distracted and say, oh, I want that. Oh, now I want that. And forget about some of the other things that are more important to them. As people get old, they tend to find and remember that relationships were some of the most important things in their lives. And so they'll put more attention on that. Besides people and things like that, you may have certain projects that you want to fulfill, or certain things that you want to go explore. So I find that it's important to have a set of ways that you can evaluate whether a pleasure, one pleasure is more important than the other. In this case, importance equals more pleasure. So it takes some time to really go through your life and say, wait a minute, this pleasure that I've got here, whether it's watching television or eating a chocolate cake, is that a greater pleasure than going down to the beach or going on a hike? So it's really getting more skilled at understanding which pleasures are the most important to you. So those are the 7 skills of pleasure that I've defined.
Very nice. Yeah. So the last one is to really think about which pleasures are most important to me in order to be able to focus on them even more. Right.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, because we can obviously mostly focus on a few things and not on all, and there are some that will be more beneficial for us and others not so much, but we might think we want this or that.
It's easy to get distracted.
Right. Very nice. Yeah, thank you. So the reason why I said I think this term shaman of pleasure is very nice and very well thought out is that a shaman is somebody who is healing relationships, right? And so your work is healing the relationship between people and their pleasure, kind of. Could I put it like that?
Yes, you could. I don't know that I would, but
yes. But how would you put it?
No, a shaman is a healer,
right?
And so this is not only about healing your pleasure, but it's also using pleasure to heal.
Right. Yeah.
So when I work with people, most of my shamanic healing involves reframing a problem or looking at a problem and saying, okay, if we look at it differently, it's not so much a problem. And let's look at it in terms of what's going to make us feel good or feel better. So by being mindful of the pleasure of a situation and then reordering how we think about things, then and when we are mindful of the various pleasures, then we choose the one that's going to give us the most pleasure, and that usually is the thing that works best. So forgiveness is something that is a tool that we use for healing. Because if we can forgive somebody, we stop blaming them for whatever we're feeling, then we can become more powerful in our lives. So we do the forgiveness, which has essentially nothing to do with anybody else. This is how we order our lives. And we do it on the basis of what feels good. Forgiveness makes us feel better. Fine. It's a whole lot nicer feeling than being angry. So I've stopped being angry for the most part because I don't like the feeling.
Right.
And I'm not doing it for any high-minded reason. I just don't like the feeling of being angry. So fine, I stop being angry and say, okay, I'll let that go because it doesn't make that much difference to me. And I get the pleasure of going about my day without it.
Right. I think that's a very powerful and at the same time simple, but for most minds probably even too simple approach to say, do I like how I feel?
Right.
And if I don't, I can change it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
And that puts a lot of power in our hands, doesn't it?
It doesn't adjust. Absolutely. Yep.
And that's wonderful, I think, yeah. So, yeah, that leads me actually to another question. I really enjoyed reading one of your articles. It's called No Pain, No Gain.
Uh-huh.
You remember that one, I think.
Sure.
And there you explain that many people have these beliefs about achieving things and how it's possible to do that only through hardship. Right. And so are there, obviously there are, it's a rhetoric question, but are there other more pleasant and maybe even more effective ways of creating things and doing things?
Well, I think the simple answer to that, although a rhetorical question doesn't need an answer,
I mean, the question would be, of course, then, and what are they?
Okay. The first one that comes to mind is to love things into being.
That's beautiful, yeah.
If you want something, love it. And allow yourself to put your attention on that and on your love. The love is highly energizing, highly focused, and most likely to give you what you want, because you're looking at this desire positively and saying, okay, yeah, all I have to do is love it, keep my focus on it, and somehow it appears. As opposed to working really hard and excuse me, working really hard and hating what you're doing.
Right.
The trick here is focus.
Mm-hmm.
It comes into being because you're focused on it. If you like your focus, as in loving it into being, then it's likely to happen easily. If you're working hard on it, well, you're still focused on it, but it'll take a lot longer.
Right. And it will also not feel very good while it takes.
That's right. That's right.
Right, right.
Yep.
Yeah, I really love that approach, and it, besides that it's working much better, it's also very relieving and relaxing, isn't it?
And pleasurable.
And pleasurable, yes. Because it really, it is what our coup, our inner child, or how you might call it, actually wants the world to be.
Right.
To love things into being and not to force them into being, right?
Right.
So when I read this article and also your other teachings, heard your other teachings, I have often a moment of relaxation, inner relaxation, because okay, yeah, I think that's what I felt in my heart already years ago, but I always thought I was wrong. And
right.
Somebody here is finally here is somebody
who's
telling
be
me
just as wrong as you.
who is just as wrong as me, right? No, but who is actually giving me the impression that maybe I'm not that wrong.
Right. Right. Good. Good.
Right. Yeah, thank you so much. So, what would be your favorite way or most effective way to explore one's pleasures and train one's capacity to enjoy them?
I go back to the very first of the skills, learning to feel and to pay attention to how you feel. And in our worlds, most emphasis is placed on rational thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to discover who we are by figuring ourselves out. But so far as I can tell, the experience of knowing who we are is a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And so by understanding what our feelings are and exploring and accepting every last one of them, then we move into a place where we are at one with the world. We're not resisting the world. Most pain, most disease is brought on by resisting parts of ourselves.
Mm.
And so we have to feel into ourselves, not think our way in, but feel our way into all the parts of ourselves and accept all these parts of ourselves. And only in that way can we bring about our harmony and the peace that we all crave so much.
So it's about self-acceptance and self-love.
That's right.
First of all, and then...
But only getting there,
yeah.
not by intellect.
Right.
But by feeling.
By feeling, yeah. And that also reminds me about the topic of the feeling tones you teach us, and,
right.
and the books you recommend from Seth teach about. So I have the impression that there is a layer where these feeling tones, where these innate feeling of being us lies, and we can enter that and feel that,
Yes.
and that will bring us to who we truly are.
Yes.
Right? So what do you recommend? How can we get there?
By taking time to feel.
Right.
To me, that's a real meditation, is quietly feeling. And you know, people want to calm their thoughts. Well, they don't calm their thoughts because they keep thinking about their thoughts.
Right.
It's you let go of your thoughts when you put your attention on feeling. And just, you know, feel. Spend time feeling. Well, how do I feel about this? And what's this feeling that's coming up? What am I resisting? Most of the time it's because we're resisting a feeling. Okay. So, whatever way works for a person, it's a matter of feeling, of just, what does this feel like? Most people now, I recognize, are afraid of feeling too much.
And I think they are afraid of feeling bad, right?
Well, yes, they're afraid of feeling bad and the intensity of feeling bad. And I think people are afraid of intensity. Well, intensity is not the same as pain. Pain includes intensity, but also fear. But you get rid of the fear, and it's just intensity. And if we recognize that we're going to be okay, even if whatever it is we're feeling is intense. Love is intense. Joy is intense. Harmony is intense. Peace is intense. But we have to remember that our feelings can't hurt us, but resisting them can. So the more we get used to feeling, the more powerful we become. The feeling, you know, to create, to manifest, to bring things into being is a combination of a thought and feeling.
Right.
So the feelings are extremely powerful. And the more we get comfortable with our feelings, the more powerful we become.
Yeah. So the starting point, or the tool, is learning to pay attention to our feelings and feel them.
Right.
And enjoy them.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Very nice. So we can enjoy ourselves here in your beautiful garden right now.
Excellent.
I don't have any more question in my mind.
Okay, I don't have any questions in my mind.
That's good. Isn't that the status of just being?
So far as I can
enjoying?
tell, it is.
Very lovely. I think that's a good point to that nice conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
There was a
Chris.
lot in that. And mahalo for letting me visit you here in your paradise.
Delighted to have you always.
Wonderful. And all the best for you out there on YouTube.
Aloha.
Aloha and goodbye.